Welcome to Kids Academy.
Hi and welcome to the Kids Academy chess course. My name is Robert Lazorchak and I'm a certified teacher with international and national chess teaching certifications. I will be your guide as we begin to master this great game. Now let's get to the chess. Hi, my name is Rob Lazorchak and I'm very excited to be here with Kids Academy to create this tutorial series on how to play chess. So today we're going to talk about the rook. It's one of the fastest pieces, one of the most powerful pieces. And here it is. Here's a rook on d4. It looks kind of like a tower or a castle. In fact, a lot of people call it that, but the proper name is a rook. And rooks can go up and down and sideways to the left and sideways to the right. It kind of looks like a plus sign or the letter T. Now rooks have a lot of choices. They can do a short move and go one step, or they can go all the way to the top of the board in a single move. Same thing with sideways. They can move along the rank or the row one step or all the way across. So this rook has a lot of choices. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and I want you to count how many squares this rook can move to, going up, down, or side to side. So let's count them together. This rook can go sideways, 1, 2, 3, 4, up, 5, 6, 7, 8, sideways to the left, 9, 10, 11, and down 12, 13, 14. The rook has 14 choices. It can go sideways, up, down, to any of those 14 squares. I'm going to go ahead and move the rook. The rook's on d4. I'm going to do a sideways move. And remember, in chess, we call the rows ranks. So I'm going to move along the fourth rank, put the rook on h4. Now black would have a turn, and once it's my turn again, I'll move the rook on the file. That's our chess word for column or up and down. And I'm on the h file. I'll move the rook up to h8. The rook goes in straight lines, up, down, or side to side. Here's a square. Let's put a marker on c4. Now this rook, or any rook, can visit any square on the chessboard in only 2 turns. And I want you to think about, using our ranks and files, how this rook on h8 can get to the square c4 in only 2 turns. Go ahead and pause the video if you need to, but here's a hint. There are actually 2 paths to get to c4. Okay, so this rook can go across the rank and it would stop at c8. And on its second turn, it can move down the c file and get to c4. We can go sideways and then down. Or the second path, if you found it, we can go down first along the file, rook h4, and then we can use the fourth rank and play rook c4. 2 different ways of getting there. Both are totally fine and equally good. 2 ways to get to any square on the board, in this case, to c4. Let's do another one. How can the rook get to... How can the rook get to f6? So the rook can go sideways to f8, along the 8th rank, and then to f6 on the f file, or the rook can go to h6, stop, and then go to f6 along the 6th rank. I'm going to go ahead and put this rook on c5. What if we want the rook to go to f2? Pause the video and think of 2 different ways the rook can get to f2 in only 2 turns. Using the 5th rank, we can go rook f5 and then down rook f2. Or we can go the opposite way. We can go down first rook c2 and then rook f2. A nice thing about the rook is that it captures in the same way it moves. So rooks can capture up, down, side to side, or we can say they capture on ranks and files. If I go ahead and put a black rook here on g5, and it's white's turn, this white rook is aiming at the black rook. It can see the black rook, and on white's turn, it could capture the rook. Now remember, when you capture a piece, your rook nudges into it, it replaces it, kind of nudges it out of the way ever so gently, and you take the captured piece, put it on the side of the board. So that black rook just got captured. Let's do another one. Let's see here. Put a black rook there. Now I'm going to put a pawn in the way. In this example, the white rook cannot capture the black rook. Do you know why? Well, we didn't talk about it yet, but this white rook is not able to jump over pieces. And as soon as you capture the first piece, your turn is over and you stop. So here the rook cannot capture the rook on g6 because the pawn is in the way. The rook could capture the black pawn if it wanted to, and then it stops. But now it's black's turn, and black has a very good move here. Black could capture the white rook. And we didn't talk about it yet, but because rooks are faster and they control more squares, rooks are more valuable than pawns. So in this position, the white rook would not want to capture the pawn on f6. Okay, time for a little quiz. Put a pawn here. Let's see, put a rook. Okay, in this example, which pawn can the rook capture? Can the rook capture the pawn on d4, or can the rook capture the pawn on f4? Now remember, rooks can move on ranks and files, so if I look up, there's nothing to capture. If I look sideways to the left, those squares are all empty, nothing to capture. If I look to the right, I can visit any of these squares, but they're all empty as well. However, if I look down along the D file, I see that the rook is aiming at the pawn on d4. The rook is able to capture. Okay, let's put a pawn here. Let's put a pawn here. Question number 2. Which pawn can the rook capture in this example? There's a pawn on h4, there's a pawn on f6, and there's a rook on d4. So this is a straight line, the rook to f6, but rooks don't travel diagonally. They travel on ranks and files. So while the rook could capture this pawn in 2 moves by going up on the file and over on the rank, we can't capture it in 1. The correct answer, if we look across along the rank, is the rook can capture the pawn on h4. Okay, final question. Let's see. In this game, which black rook can white capture? Which black rook can white capture? This one's a little bit trickier, but if you remember, we said rooks can't jump over pieces. Here, we cannot capture the rook on h7. We have a pawn on h6 that's in the way. This rook could only go 1 step, then he'd have to stop. We can't just barrel over or jump over. But if we look along the 4th rank and go sideways to the left, now the rook is able to capture the black rook on b4. We would slide into it, nudge it off, and pluck it off the board, put it on the side. So let's review what we learned about the rooks. Rooks can move up, down, or side to side. We learned 2 new chess vocabulary words today, ranks, which is a word for rows or side to side, and we learned the word file, which is for up and down, or we can say file instead of the word column. Rooks move on ranks and files as far as they want. They can do short moves, or if they have a clear path, an unobstructed path, they can move all the way across the board. A rook can visit any square on the board in 2 moves, and a rook can play on both colors. They can visit light squares, and it can visit dark squares. Rooks never jump over pieces, but if they have a clear line, they capture this same way that they move. So my name is Rob Lazorchak. That is it for the rooks today. Stay tuned for our next video on the bishops. Thank you so much.
Subscribe to our channel to stay updated on new videos. Find links to our apps in the comments below.